Question is, why are you encouraging people to break the law for you in this election?
So Stacey Abrams is calling out Brian Kemp in this clip.
Mr. Kemp, you are very aware that I know the laws of Georgia when it comes to voting. In fact, I am one of the foremost experts in the state on expansion of voting rights. And I have never in my life asked for anyone who is not legally eligible to vote to be able to cast a ballot. What I've asked for is that you allow those who are legally eligible to vote to allow them to cast their ballots. And in fact, we took you to court in 2016, and a federal judge said that you illegally canceled 34,000 registrations. You use the exact same system, the exact match system that is under dispute right now. Now, I realize that in the next response, you're going to say that it's a function of my organization because your tendency is to blame everyone else for the mistakes that you make. My responsibility as a leader is to see a problem and try to solve it. When I saw that we had 800,000 unregistered people of color in the state of Georgia, I started an organization that has reached into every county and increased those registrations. When I saw that people were being unlawfully denied the right to vote, I worked to make certain that we held you accountable. And as the next governor of Georgia, I will continue to do my job to make certain that every legally eligible vote that gets cast gets counted.
So this clip, highlighted by USMC Angry Veteran, points out Stacey Abrams really going after Brian Kemp, especially when it comes to the issue of rules around voting. Republicans love to rig the rules, which is to say they like playing games to suppress votes. And then, this is where it gets really wild, they love to blame Democrats and say that Democrats are actually the ones that are rigging elections. When in reality, it's not that elections are rigged by the way that votes are counted. Elections in the United States are rigged through things like gerrymandering, through drawing districts, through setting rules about who is and isn't allowed to vote. And that really is at the heart of the issue, because Republicans love to play an unfair game. They love to do the extreme gerrymandering. They love to do illegal voter purges. They love to do all of the things that makes it harder for somebody to vote, like putting in place voter ID laws, requiring an address, and purging people from the voting rolls periodically. And they do all this in an effort to make sure that they have an unfair advantage, which is already on top of the unfair advantage that exists in the form of the Senate and other systems that lead to the disproportionate representation of relatively wealthier white folks in this country. And so in all reality, I actually think that Stacey Abrams is being too nice to Brian Kemp, and I think the Democrats across the board have been far too nice to Republicans. Democrats say they don't want to lend credence to Republican claims about voter fraud, but the reality is, by completely ignoring the reality, that is, Republicans doing everything they can to stop people from voting, Democrats are basically committing themselves to failure in advance. I mean, just look at the 2000 election, where a real recount would have revealed pretty clearly that Al Gore was actually the winner of the 2000 election, but the Supreme Court overturned that election. And then with the issue of Stacey Abrams, I don't think Brian Kemp should have been allowed to be seated because he wrongfully purged enough voters that could have swung the state of Georgia. But because we live in a system where Democrats like to play by the rules, which means they don't actively challenge the threats to the system that come from the Republicans, for the sake of tradition, decorum, for civility, the Democratic Party by and large doesn't demand the type of hijinks that the Republican Party demands, where when the Republican Party loses an election, they say that everything is fraudulent. Even when Republicans win, like the way that George Bush won or that Brian Kemp won, they claim that to be completely fair. And not only that, but they actually project their own tactics onto the Democrats. And they say that Democrats are the ones that are trying to rig the rules, and that Democrats are playing unfair. Because the harsh reality is, the United States has never been a democracy. And the Founding Fathers never wanted the United States to be a democracy. The Founding Fathers were white supremacists, and they always thought that white supremacy should always supersede democracy. They quite literally called democracy the tyranny of the majority. And to this very day, the United States still does not have universal voter enfranchisement. When you consider the fact that people without addresses very often in many states are not allowed to vote, when you consider the fact that a lot of states have prior felony voting laws, and when you consider the fact that people are not allowed to vote from prison, throw that on top of the fact that the United States has the largest prison population, where people get thrown in prison for non-violent drug offenses, then you can recognize that the United States has never been a democracy. In fact, in some states, is as high as 8% of the entire population that's denied the right to vote due to prior felony voting laws. And we all know, because of the war on drugs, that it was specifically targeted against Black Americans to deny them the right to vote. Since the beginning, the United States has always been a colonial project, and it continues to be so to this very day, where Black and brown folks are thrown into prison needlessly, and then those prisons are put into districts with relatively wealthy white voters, so that when they do the population counts, it disproportionately inflates the power of their votes. Not to mention the fact that those people are quite literally enslaved to the benefit of private corporations. So all this is to say, Stacey Abrams here, even while dunking on Brian Kemp, is being far too nice and is leaning too much into the notion of decorum and civility. If Democrats were being honest, they'd be screaming at the top of their lungs that Republicans are simply not playing fair, and Republicans have no interest in playing fair, because at the end of the day, they don't care about democracy. The problem is, the Democrats too have a problem. At a systemic level, the Democratic Party is unwilling to let go of the white supremacist systems that we have. And because of that, they are unwilling to demand a true democracy.